So I often get this question about how I became an accountant. This is one of the common questions I get, especially on podcasts or when I'm speaking, is how did you become an accountant? Because like in a weird backhanded compliment, it's like you actually have a personality and you actually like talking to people. Like, how did you become an accountant? Is almost how I hear it. And my answer is always I lost a bet with my dad. So if you haven't heard the story, I'm going to tell the story in its entirety. I tell a very abridged version of it on most of those podcasts because nobody wants to hear the whole monologue. Well, this episode is going to be the monologue, but this episode is also going to, it intends to serve you to explain how I got here and what I've learned. And I hope that it would make me the happiest is if you listen to some of this episode, learn more about my story, and it inspires you to somehow do the same thing that my dad did for your kids. Because I'm going to explain what he did that in hindsight, because hindsight's 2020, I'm going to explain what he did and what advice he gave me that completely shaped my reality and why I am so damn happy and why I've been able to be successful, not only in my career, but in my own business. I attribute so much of it to small micro actions and steps and pieces of advice that my dad gave me. Now, to understand this whole story, understand that my dad passed away in 2013 from liver cancer. He was diagnosed in 2008. And when he passed away, I was the last person with him. I was there in the hospital with him. And I'm going to tell you a bit of that story along with going back a little bit into how he began to influence me. And if anyone who's listening knows me or knows my dad, I hope this does it justice. My dad was a very powerful personality. I wish you guys could meet him. He was literally the walking Peter Griffin. If I've ever shown you a picture of him, I'm going to put him on my website. I'm going to put a picture up so you guys can see him. I've recently shared, we just passed the 10-year anniversary of his death in December. So I did put up a post. You can see a little bit of pictures of him. And I think I'm pretty accurate when I say he looks like Peter Griffin. Anyway, what I want to tell you is this story about how I became an accountant with a little bit more detail behind it. So when I was younger, my dad would bug me all the time, like all the way from kindergarten. I think since the point I learned how the word no, he would say, "Hey, Shan, you want to be an accountant when you grow up?" No. I'd be like, "Dad, what do you even do? Like, what do you do? What does an accountant actually do?" And he goes, "I count things." I'm like, "No, you don't. I count. That's not a job. Like, what do you actually do?" He would never really tell me, but he would say, "Do you want to become an accountant when you grow up?" And I'd be like, "Nah, no, absolutely not." For two reasons. One was I didn't know what the hell he did. Or actually three reasons. Number two, he would just disappear for 3 months at a time in the winter. He was more of like an audit guy. He had a tax partner. He didn't do as much in taxes, but he was definitely busy at tax season. And the third reason was just because out of being being a daughter, I didn't want to do what my dad said. So I was like, no, I don't want to do what makes you happy. It's probably like eating vegetables. I don't like it. So I would always resist. Now, we finally got to this point when I was about 15, 16 years old. My high school, north of Boston, they had an accounting class. They had a requirement where you had to take like what they call a fine art and a practical art as your electives in high school. A fine art would be something like graphic design, which I also took. It might be, which was definitely not what it would be today. This was in the early 2000s or like late 90s. So it was graphic design, it was illustration, drawing, painting, drama, whatever it would be, right? Acting, fine arts. Then there would be practical arts, which I thought was a really funny title now that I think about it, which would be intro to business. They would teach us how to reconcile a checkbook. Again, aging myself. But they would teach us how to reconcile a checkbook. It was keyboarding, which was typing, how to type on a computer. Again, bear with me. My fellow elder millennials will be like, yup, same. Keyboarding. And they also had accounting. Now, accounting was done all by hand. We had paper ledgers and we had like source documents, which are receipts, invoices, and so on. We had to learn about what these things were telling us and how to use them to do accounting. So the accounting class was a whole year. And my dad said, "Hey, you need to take a practical art for 2 semesters. This would satisfy that. Please take it. If you hate it, I'm never going to bug you again. If you hate it, I'm never going to ask you to be an accountant again. If you love it, though, you have to major in it when you go to college." And I was like, I want to be a Spanish teacher. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, my favorite class is Spanish. I love art. I love drawing. That's all I knew about what I wanted to do with myself. And my dad was like, I know you want to teach language, but please take this class. If you love it, please major in it. And I was like, I'm going to hate this class. I'm going to hate this. I know I'm going to hate this. He didn't really explain to me what accounting was or what it entailed or what skills were necessary. Now, my favorite classes in high school were Spanish and math. Okay. I loved math. I loved the sciences, math. I loved like learn a rule, apply the rule, take the test, turn it in. Like, it was kind of like we learned the rules and I just would solve the problems using the rules that we learned. I think I'm really good with that. I'm really good with memorizing rules and then applying them, like Spanish rules, conjugating verbs, applying them. So I noticed that was the skill. So I would encourage you, if you're a parent, it's less about the subject, because I had shitty teachers in subjects I should have excelled at. And the shitty teachers ruined those subjects for me, making me think that I didn't like the subject, when in reality, what I love is critical thinking. What I love is applying theory into practice. What I love is learning a set of regulations and then figuring out how to navigate them in real life. Guess what that is? Accounting. So if you can go a step deeper into why your teenager loves that subject, why they're good at it, what comes natural to them about that subject, there is probably a dimension of that will serve them in another context other than the literal context of, let's say, history or English or science, physics. There's, just in case you're wondering that, like, oh, they love physics, they should be an engineer. Maybe not. So going back to my dad telling me about this, I said, okay, fine. So I took the class. Within a couple of weeks, okay, I had over 100 average, which they used to do with extra credit and other things. I loved this class, you guys. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Now, am I weird? Absolutely. I am not the norm. But because I was given the chance to take this class, and because, my teacher was great. Was she like extraordinary, like out of a movie? Like, no, like, she was great. She was a great teacher, great accounting teacher. But I took to the subject very easily. And there was actually another accounting class for the seniors. I was a junior at the time. There was another accounting class for the seniors called honors accounting, which you could take I guess it was just if you were really into it. It was all seniors and me and like one other junior. I got bumped into that within 2 weeks, into the senior class. Like, they changed my schedule around and they were like, put her in honors accounting. And I fell in love with it. I can't explain it. It's like a blur. I got it. We did paper accounting. Like, literally, I had to do accounting on paper with pencil for a whole year of a business. And I had to do the bookkeeping. And what we figured out was that and this happened to me, we had to go all the way back if we made a mistake and like erase every number that came after it in the journal. Oh my God. I've been there. So all my old school accountants listening, I've done it. We have to erase every single number. There were no spreadsheets. We did nothing on spreadsheets. Now, I say all that to say that when I came to my dad and I said, Dad, I think I really like this. I really like this class. He said, Shan, he like just pulled me aside. He was like, Shan, listen, if you like this, if this is easy, I want you to understand that most people do not think this is easy. Most people hate this. Most people cannot understand this. They just cannot understand it. This is a language that very few people speak. He's not wrong when he said that. He tells me this when I'm 16. This is a language not many people speak. If you understand it, then this is the language you're meant to teach. This is the language you're meant to teach. He said, you can teach people Spanish. Plenty of people speak Spanish. Plenty of people can learn Spanish. Plenty of people can teach Spanish. Nobody can teach this. And if you understand it so easily at 16, you can teach it. And I was like, I immediately was like literally thinking teaching accounting. And I was like, I don't want to be a professor. And he said, no, You'll know, like, you know what I mean? You'll be able to share this with business owners. Like, he didn't really explain it to me, but this is what he was actually saying, was like, you can share this knowledge with others somehow. And that was a really big, important conversation because I completely understood what he was trying to say. And I said, okay, I really like this. I could take accounting classes all through college. I love it. And he said, you can still take Spanish. This is why I went to a liberal arts school. I went to Elon. I was going to go to Bentley. It was between Bentley and Elon, literally sitting in front of me, which school I wanted to go to. My mother and father were very happy I chose the cheaper school. But I was sitting there I was very lucky and blessed. 2 acceptance letters in front of me. And I said, I really want to go to Elon. Why? Because I could expand into Spanish. I knew that it was a liberal arts school that would enable me to study something else if for any reason this didn't work out. Bentley was exclusively business. I also knew I was going to meet a big variety of people at Elon. I was going to see 16 of my own classmates at Bentley. It was going to be like deja vu because everybody went to a local school in Boston. So I decided to go to Elon. He was very happy about that, my dad. And when we came back from campus, when we went to go visit there, we actually went to like an accounting department, what do you call it? Like an accounting department meet and greet type of thing for prospective students. Like when I applied early decision back when that was like rolling admissions and so on, I went and met with the accounting professors. And to this day, I'm still friends with them, which is really funny. And I'm on the board of their accounting department now. It's nutty to think about. But I met with the professors and they gave us the course catalog, like the courses that we would have to take. And I remember we were on the plane. I remember this vividly. We were sitting on the plane and my dad would sit there and he was highlighting all the courses to take. He was like, take this, don't take these classes together, don't stack these ones. Wait till junior year to take this. Here's the order you should go in. Here's like your class schedule for the next 4 years. There you go. And I was like, okay, like this guy's the expert. He's the one who knows better. I followed his advice to the T. I fought to get into those courses, even if most of them were sophomores. I took accounting my freshman year when normally it's reserved for sophomore at the time. I got away with that because I took the accounting class in high school. There were so many different advantages that my dad gave me that just by listening to him and absorbing that advice really did set me on a path ahead. But here's what I want you to take away from that. Whether it's you or someone else, how can you set up yourself or your children with that type of advice? So if it's a mentor, maybe it's literally this podcast. If you have somebody who's thinking about studying accounting or business, I can't emphasize enough that my dad's influence was everything in kicking off and launching my career, my education, everything. And it was a really important step for me to be able to acknowledge that and to like look back and just like really unpack, at the time it's doing whatever he said, just following his advice. But looking back, I go, oh, wow, like it was just the influence he had and me making choices based on trusting him, that he was going to make the right choice for me and that he had proven himself before. I went on to get my CPA. I went on to work in public accounting at a big 4 firm. Now, this story and working at the firm, I'm going to give you a high level of some major steps in my career in this firm and how my dad really was instrumental in this. So let me preface this, and I've said it before. I love the firm I worked for. I wouldn't change a single day I spent in that organization. I also would not go back. And those things can live simultaneously. It was the perfect place to work for where I was. It evolved in different directions. I also am aware that culturally, there were a lot of elements that conflict with what I value now. But here's the thing. I value them because of that experience. So I learned boundaries. I learned what I'm willing and unwilling to tolerate because I had it tested. And if you've never had it tested, how do you know where your boundaries are? So when you're younger in your career, I would encourage you to be willing to enter into a situation that will make you uncomfortable, to enter into a situation where your boundaries may and probably will be tested. If nothing else, what you gain from that is the establishment of said boundaries. And that's exactly what happened. So here's an interesting thing that happened. I will go into this possibly in more detail on a future episode if you would like. I want to make sure this serves you. But what happened was after my second year with the firm, in a nutshell, there was a situation where my superiors, my team working on an audit, were accused of, how would I put this? We'll call it like an ethical malpractice. They were accused of forging / creating fabricated documents to serve an inspection that was coming up. This was definitely frowned upon by our governing body, which is the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, PCAOB. It was definitely a slap on the wrist for the firm as well, because what happened was the government, because the PCAOB is under the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. They're kind of like a governing body in Washington, D.C. for auditors like ourselves, for accounting firms. They would do inspections every year. And in this case, we were accused of, again, in a nutshell, cheating on the inspection by creating stuff that didn't exist prior and violating our terms of when we edit documents. Like we were tampering with evidence, if you will. Now, I was not involved in this firsthand necessarily, but here's the interesting thing. The stuff that they were, quote unquote, fabricating had my name on it. The stuff that they were messing around with, I should say allegedly, but it's been determined that this did happen. So I can say this, the press release was out, the enforcement was out, like this is what happened. They were messing with the file. And what ended up happening was I got roped into, due to some email exchanges that had happened and a few other correspondence and the fact that my name was on the documentation. I was roped into this case and I was deposed in Washington, D.C. in front of the PCAOB. I was given a lawyer. I was told not to talk to anyone. I was, quite frankly, scared shitless because I had just gotten my license in 2009. Literally 6 months later, I'm pulled into this court case. I'm pulled into this entire situation on not understanding what's going on at all. I was terrified. Brand new baby staff too. And I'm like, oh my God, what is happening? And I called my dad. I immediately started, after enough of sleepless nights and anxiety and panic attacks. I started having my first panic attacks here. I called my dad and I was like, Dad, I think I want to quit. I just got a job offer from this other company. I've been looking. I called a recruiter. I just got a job offer from this other company that interviewed me, and they want to offer me more than I was making. I think they offered me like 80 grand to come and work for them. And it was a big pay bump for me. And my dad said, okay, well, do you really want to do that? You worked so hard to get into this firm and you did not want to stay 1.5 years. You wanted to stay 3 or more years. Like we talked about this, you have to stay 3 or more years to really unlock the ranking or to get the respect and to get the experience that you want out of this experience, out of this step in your career. I said, yeah, I know, but this is awful. I've never been so miserable. I've never been so upset. I'm lying awake at night. This is hell. I absolutely hate it. I hate that I get pulled into frosted window conference rooms in a suit to go talk to the legal counsel, and I can't tell my boss where I'm going. I have to sneak around the office. People are spreading rumors about me, about where I'm going, that I'm looking for other work. People are telling me I'm sneaking off. My boss is mad at me for quote unquote sneaking off because I can't tell them where I'm going. I'm just I'm damned no matter what I do. And I then have to go answer to these general counsel lawyers who are asking me questions. They took my laptop. They're going through all my emails. I'm miserable. I'm terrified. And he says, I get that. But whose fault is this? And he's never really been one to blame people or encourage blaming people. So I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, who caused this on you? I said, well, these 3 people or 4 people that did something bad, allegedly at the time. And he said, okay, because I knew enough about what was going on that I knew who was accused of what. I was a witness. I was not an accused. I was a witness, but I was really tired of being pulled in. And my dad said, okay, these people did something bad. What's going to happen to them? I said, I don't know. If they're guilty, I guess they're going to be in trouble and probably ejected from the firm. And he's okay. If they're found innocent, what will happen? And I go, well, I can't imagine they would want to come back to work after that happens. So I imagine they're probably going to leave the firm and probably go work somewhere else. Okay. He says, so here's the thing, Shan. You're going to go find another job. Fine. But do you like what you do now? Aside from these a-holes, do you like what you do? Yeah. Do you like the clients you serve? Absolutely. I had a really good client. And he says, do you like the people you work with? I said, yeah. And he says, okay. So here's my question. Why are you applying a permanent solution to a temporary problem? That shook me to my core. Why are you applying a permanent solution to a temporary problem? And I was like, huh. This is, why the hell are you running away? Why are you letting them win? They're going to change the course of your career in addition to what they've done to you? Absolutely not. You're going to go back in that office. You're going to outlive them. You will survive them. I guarantee it. That when this is over in a few months, you're going to be back at work. You're going to be well respected. No one's going to mess with you. And you're going to be back to doing what you like to do without them. They will not be a problem in a matter of a few months. So why are you willing to change your entire career to avoid an uncomfortable couple of months? And I was like, damn it, he's right. I went on to stay at the firm. I went on to stay there for 6.5 years, actually. I stayed for 3 years in audit, which is exactly what the plan was. I stayed for 3 years in audit, and then I went on to do accounting consulting and process improvement consulting for 3 years, mostly traveling on the road. I got to travel the country. I got to become like elite platinum ambassador status on Marriott, Starwood, major souvenir. And I really enjoyed my career. I progressed really rapidly after that because it developed me into a confident person willing to speak up, willing to say when I saw something, willing to ask questions. And it actually put me in a position where I started training the new staff on the ethical requirements of documentation. They used me as an example of what you should do because I had followed the rules and so on, but they kind of saw me as, hey, Shannon's a great resource for this. It actually catapulted my career. And it's a really interesting story because who would have thought that something so terrible in the moment would be such a shaper of who I am and how I work? And I shared that with you to really identify where in your life you are possibly applying a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Like, where are the circumstances going to change naturally, but you're trying to rush the process and putting yourself in a disadvantage, trying to be impatient with that process. So that was a really powerful scenario. And to this day, the best advice my dad has given me. Lastly, I'm going to share with you his parting wisdom, parting advice to me. And this one also kind of cut me through. Like, there are these like the 3 major milestone moments of my life with my father in how he really had me take a hard turn in my life. So there was the first one, again, choosing to become an accountant and major in it. Second one was choosing to stay at the firm and to apply that advice and to, persevere. And the third one was on his deathbed, which we didn't know was his deathbed at the time. We knew he was in the hospital. I brought him to the hospital. He was not doing well. I did not know at the time that he would not be going home. I believe he may have known that based on the timing of when the doctors came and so on. So he may have known that, which makes this even more powerful of a piece of advice. But I sat there with him, and in 2013, I was 5.5, 6 years into the firm. I was in the consulting practice. I was traveling a ton. I happened to be home in December in Boston, and I brought him to the hospital that day or that week. And later on that week, drove over to Longwood Medical where he was, and I saw him, and I was like, Dad, I am miserable at work. I feel like I'm hitting a wall. I really want to leave. I'm really trying to persevere. I'm trying to, find the good in this. I'm trying to figure out where I fit in here. And I don't think I want to make partner. I really don't think I want to make partner. I really think I'm done. I've done what I came to do here. And I said, what do I do? Like, what do I do? And he just looked at me square in the eye and said, whatever the fuck you want. And I was like, what? And he said, whatever the fuck you want. And I said, excuse me? Like the guy who has like all the wisdom and the exact instructions down to what courses I need to take and down to everything else. You have told me everything I need to do in my life, every move to make. And now you're telling me whatever the fuck I want. And he looked at me and he goes, I got nothing else for you. You majored in accounting. You went to the firm. You stayed there for 5+ years. You are now an experienced manager at a Big 4 firm in a major city. You've traveled the country doing all of this crazy stuff. Do whatever the fuck you want. And it like didn't dawn on me until literally after he passed away that this entire time what he had done was just try to get me to that point. He just tried to get me to the point where he could say that. And what I realized in that moment, I guess in the moment, I was frustrated. In the moment, I was like, what do you mean, whatever the fuck I want? Please tell me what to do. The king of telling me exactly what to do, he was my magic 8 ball. He would just give me the instructions. But in that moment, I was like, okay, I'm going to sit with that. And I said goodbye to him that night. And it dawned on me after the dust cleared and after a few months, I stayed at the firm. And after having several panic attacks, mostly from grief, and many situations in the firm where I really needed to physically was forced to leave. I said, I need to leave the firm. I cannot operate with this much stress and anxiety. I'm having panic attacks and I can't be alone in a hotel room traveling all the time. I want to go home to my family. I want to be with my Zumba girls. I want to go to the gym. I want to go back to having a routine. I want to live in my house. I want comfort. And the firm wasn't willing to give me that at the time. So I left. And the coolest part of that is we think it's such like a big cliff jump to leave a cushy, comfortable, routine-based job like that. It is actually way more in our heads than you think. I left. It was a huge deal to me to leave that company. It was my first job out of college. I left. I worked in a consulting practice. I then went on to work in sales at a software company and a few other places in my career. And what I realized from that point forward, as I changed jobs and as I changed careers, was that each time it was just based on whatever the fuck I wanted to do, which is exactly what my dad told me. It was, Shan, just do whatever the fuck you want. Why? Because at that point, I had the experience that I always had that name on my resume. I had the landing pad. He built me like the launch pad and the crash pad. He built me the thing that, like, when you jump on a trapeze, he built me the net. He built me the freaking net. And he's like, just fucking jump. We did it. The net is built. You're fine. And too often we are stuck, afraid to jump, not knowing that the net's underneath us. Because someone has chosen to convince us that it's not there and make us not look down and say, well, you don't have a net underneath you. Don't jump. Whoever that is trying to hold you back. You probably have a net underneath you that you're choosing to ignore, that you have and not take advantage of. I decided to make the jump. And like I said, I switched jobs actually very few months after that because I did not like the job I went to, but I did not go back. I said, that's just not what I wanted to do. Let me figure out what I want to do. And I was very opportunistic and spontaneous when I was looking. And I said, I'm going to find the first thing that really sounds fun. Because what's the harm in accumulating more fun experiences, working with some more fun people, and learning something along the way? That's how I ended up working in professional services and then sales for a software company that served accountants. I said, hey, this sounds like an interesting opportunity. Let's do it. And I'm very grateful for that opportunity because that really shaped my mind into running an accounting practice, systems and processes and so on. And then I worked in internal audit. I worked in supply chain compliance. I worked in so many different areas. And that was a huge advantage because I really learned what aspects I like, what I didn't like, the people I liked working with, the people I didn't like working with. It shaped my boundaries and my values. And I can only hope you have the same opportunity. I can only hope that your kids have the same opportunity to find a way to build that net. Please don't stifle them in what they want to do. You know, my dad could have been perceived as somebody who was directorial in how he was telling me to lead my life. Don't get that confused. He knew exactly what building blocks needed to be laid for the foundation so that he could leave me. And he didn't know at the time how much this was going to matter and how early this would happen in my life. But he just wanted to leave me with enough to fall down on and say, she's going to be fine. No matter what happens, she's going to be fine. Because I know the net is there. We did it. And when he said, do whatever the fuck you want, he was giving me the permission I never knew I needed to just jump. Because it was all going to be fine. And I hope that story resonates with you because it was so powerful in my life and governs so much of what I do now. Move to Costa Rica? Why not? Jump. What's the worst that could happen? We come back? You know, start my own business. My dad never saw it. My dad never met Jason. My dad never knew I taught Zumba. My dad never knew I did half the stuff you probably know I did. He never knew that I started this podcast. I don't think he knew what a podcast was. He never knew any of that. But God knows he would have architected it. And I don't know if he realizes, I hope he does, how much of an impact all of that advice has had on the mere existence of what I do today. So thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for listening to this podcast. I hope that this sheds some additional light on a little bit about me, my story, my dad, and how I exactly got here. Thanks for listening. I'll see you on the next episode.